Ready?
Okay, the Planning Commission meeting for February 7th, 2022 is called to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Gold? Absent. Commissioner Jamison?
Here.
Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Commissioner Rodriguez?
Here.
Chair Williams?
Here. Justin, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Please stand. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Is there anybody that would like to speak on items not on the agenda? Either in person or online. I have no speakers lists. Seeing none, we'll move on. Any requests for continuance, withdrawals, or addition of items? None. Conflicts or ex parte communications? Nothing? You want to bring it?
It was mentioned before because I did receive a notice for my shed about agenda item B this evening, if I should recuse myself. I just wanted to make sure that was, because it's a citywide item and it pertains to everybody. I don't need to recuse myself because I did get a letter from the city for a shed that I have at my house. So.
Can you clarify what the letter, just saying that the item was going to be on the agenda, or that your
Not
shed?
mine specifically, no, but it was, I did get a letter regarding, because I know it was part of the ongoing issue for the reason agenda item B was.
Right, but did you just get it because you live in Skip Mesa neighborhood, or?
No, I have a shed that was visible from the street, and that was the reason I got the letter.
Okay, saying that your shed is non-compliant, or that?
No, we never
just that
said
you have a
anything about
shed.
non-compliant. There was just, hey, it's one of them that we've noticed. That was it, where they left it at that point.
Lori, do you remember the scope of the notice that was sent out?
The way this ordinance is written, it's applying to the whole city. And in regards to the specific instances within Skip Mesa, those sheds are already existing. So these would not be altered based on what would be adopted from this time forward.
So with that, it's a citywide ordinance, so it's not dealing with the notice that you received.
Okay, just want to make it clear, transparent. Thanks.
Thank you. Approval of the minutes from December. Can I get a motion to approve?
I so move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. On to public hearing items. Item A. Could we get the staff review of that?
So this item is essentially a continuation from December 6th. As you would see in the summary of your report, it states that staff is recommending several amendments to Title 11, and the purpose of those is to update the code consistent with reorganization of the planning division, clarify the design review committee and planning commissioner respective powers and duties, to clarify the appropriate appeal body for certain design review committee and planning staff, planning division decisions, and remove outdated language and fix typographical errors. And Assistant City Attorney Chelsea Solomon will present the report.
Yes, thank you. So a lot of this is what you saw at the last meeting, but there are some updates that we made to the recommended code changes to reflect the feedback that we got from you all at the last meeting. And I'll just go kind of section or change type bucket by change type. So the first bucket of changes was to reflect the reorganization of the planning division. And per your recommendation, we have, instead of listing out planning managers, city manager designee everywhere, we have defined planning manager such in the code such that where that term appears, it means the planning manager, or if the planning manager hasn't been appointed, or is, that is a vacant position for some reason, then that term can also mean the city manager or the city manager's designee. But that's just, we use a definition, and then throughout the code, it's very cleanly the planning manager term. And that was a very helpful recommendation from you all. And then also consistent with the organizational changes, we're recommending that the references to the planning department be cleaned up, because sometimes it was planning department, planning community development department, and all of those have been changed to be planning division, which is now what it's called under the reorganization. For the design review committee powers, you all had some very helpful recommendations to clarify and kind of tighten the language, in particular to tighten the language about which design review committee recommendations the planning commission should defer to. And we've amended the language in response to that to clearly reference what types of recommendations from the design review committee that come before you that you should defer to, and if you want to disagree with, you have to, there's language in there that says you've got to explain why you still think it's your alternative path is still consistent with the design guidelines. So we've made that change as well based on your helpful recommendations. And it's tied, directly, there's a cross-reference directly to the DRC's powers and, what types of decisions they're empowered to make. So if they are, making a general recommendation about the project, that can be helpful and you can, look at it. But if it's something outside of their purview as it's specified in the code, it's not something the planning commission has to, or is instructed to defer to them on under the code. And then the clarification of the appeal body, that's another bucket. You all did not have any further recommendations on that, so those changes are the same as you saw them last time. And again, that's just to clean it up, because there was some errant references to appeal to the planning commission when it was really trying to say appeal to the city council, and so we've cleaned that up. And then the last bucket is just kind of a hodgepodge of trying to fix some outdated provisions and typographical errors. Those, again, are all the same from what you reviewed before, with the exception of the special events. In your last review of this, you requested that the special events in section 11.12.8 should include parades as a list of special events. Certainly, staff is, agrees that that's something that happens in the city a lot, and would be considered a special event. But after looking at that section further, we realized that not only do we need to list parades, but we kind of need a more holistic overhaul of that section. So instead of including revisions to that section now, we're going to bring that item before City Council to have a broader discussion about how we want to approve and treat special events in the city, and then that piece will, come back as another code amendment for you all. But we did hear your comment, and we realized it needs a bigger fix than what is appropriate in the context of this sort of cleanup that we're talking about now. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Comment? Anybody wish to speak on this item? Sorry. Does anybody wish to speak on this item? Nobody here. I have no speaker slips. Anyone online? Apparently not, so we'll bring it back for discussion and action. Any comments or?
mean, this helped a lot in looking at it a second time, and I would, instead of planning department, they went division, I don't care. I mean, you know, and instead of having a director, they did manager, and 90% of this change is that. There is some places in it, though, because I did look up definitions, and you're right, it just, when it does have the planning director before, it was, the definition was, or designee. It's all over the old code too. There's just a few places where it's still saying or designee. Maybe there's 8 that I found where you took them all out before, but it's still there. Maybe it's not a big deal, it's just there. I don't think it's a major deal. It's just hard to catch every single one of them, I'm sure. It would be nice, and I don't know this for a fact, I didn't get a chance to look at the entire code, and I don't have page numbers on mine, or maybe you guys don't either. But if I can reference, there's a change here, maybe about 5 pages in. Well, it's 10.1.2. 10.1.2, and it's building official designated. I'll get there. It's on the bottom of that page. It would be nice, right underneath that, it's 11.3.1 definitions. It'd be great to get a definition of a building official. I think it's a building code, is it the enforcement officer? We know who it is. It was our company out of Atascadero or Paso, it's whoever it is now, but we've had them before, the county contracted. Just a definition somewhere of who this building official is, contractor or whoever that is in charge of our building department. We know what, most people know what it is, but some people don't. So I don't know if there's a place in there to just kind of outline what that building official is. Employee or contracted, the person who's in charge of reviewing and, you know, plans, and that's the person, correct?
So it would be, I think the definition would just include what their duty is, and then
Correct.
it could be either an employee or contractor.
Exactly.
whichever it's organized.
Just again, for the public's sake, who don't deal with it a lot, if we can go to 11.7C1, 11.7C1. This has to deal with minor alterations, and it has to do with a development plan. So that's good that we're trying to clean that up. I'd like to see it cleaned up one step more. It's the, third sentence down, it says, such addition shall not exceed 1 every 2 years, and a total of 1,500 square feet. In total, in a 15-year, under this owner, a new owner, just, is it forever? I mean, and who's gonna track that? I like that. I know we wanted an outline, you know, it's up to 300, you can do 1 every 2 years. But the 1,500 is vital, otherwise you just keep sequentially doing it. But again, we could maybe ferret that out a little bit on the 1,500 square feet. And it can be as easy as 1,500 feet, I don't know, for the life of the property. I mean, is that what we mean it to be? If that's what it is, maybe just put it in there so that we're more specific. And let's see. The rest of this is all done. As an example, 11.12.30. You just go to 11.12.30. Under 1 and under 2H, it says planning manager or planning manager's designee in both those places. We've taken it out most places, but there's a whole bunch, maybe, like I say, 10 or 12 of them that's, the next page also has a few, like 3 or 4 of them in there, just again to try to clean it up.
Well, maybe just the question, was there a reason for leaving that in that way?
In some paragraphs and not others, I guess.
The places where it's left in, designee was there in the existing code, and we just changed the director to manager.
Gotcha.
So, you know,
But also in definition, I thought you'd said at the beginning that it goes without saying it is or their designee at all times.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's just nitpicky, it's just, I
Yeah,
don't know
we
if you
could-
want to clean them all up. I just caught it and said, wait, I thought it was always a designee. It's the only reason. Could we look at, where, I don't know what number it is, 1116-1, land use permits. So it's 1116-1D2. Oh, wait, if everyone gets there, not, so, yeah, top of the page.
Section
I think what it's saying is that we will not issue a land use permit until the 10-day appeal period is completed. It just says it kind of funny. The planning manager shall not issue a land use permit within 10 calendar days of the date that the planning planning manager took final action, during which time an appeal may be filed in according to Title I. It should just say a permit will not be issued until the 10-day appeal period expires. I read it 4 times trying to figure out, I think that's what it means to say. And again, you guys didn't change it, that's how it was, but if we're cleaning it up, if we could clean that up to just make it a little cleaner for somebody who's waiting for a 10-day appeal period. Let's see. Okay. Where I have more questions a bit is on the design review committee's powers and duties, because that was a little more substantial, it was more significant than just changing some words and things. I'd like to, somewhere in here, I know what we were trying to do on a big scale, which was, and I hated it when I was on BAR, or when being on planning, where it went to BAR, then went to planning, then it went back down to BAR, then, and if we didn't have a meeting, then it had to come to us and then skip a month. It was awful. So the appeals are great that it can go to city council, skip us. I'm really okay with that, because they meet twice a week, more fair to the public. But to the point that I've discussed with a few other people, just in passing, is when it comes to us and we do make significant changes, and I don't know how you define that, but we make changes that then will change necessitate a change in the design. For whatever reason, it's a setback issue, it's a height issue, it's a whatever issue it is. If there's somewhere in there that it could just state that on recommendation by the planning commission upon significant changes, their recommendation go back to the design committee, will be followed through on. We could always make a motion, but I don't even know how you'd make that motion. We think it ought to just, if we can put in there somewhere, understanding that when significant changes that affect the design of the project are significant upon motion or upon motion of the planning commission, will be sent back to the design review committee. Just to clarify, so that people understand that we don't do this all the time, but we have the power to send it back if it's a significant change in our opinion. Nothing against staff, but not staff's opinion in the planning commission's opinion. I'd like to see something in there, just a brief statement. But you guys cleaned up those appeals, I thought, very, very well. The big change that I saw in the design review committee is where we list out the, what do we call it, the powers, let's see, the responsibilities for. So that's under 244, duties and responsibilities. In the existing one, which I just made a copy of, there's just 5 things, I guess, performing, just 5 real simple ones. We do the 5, we renumber them, but then 8 is a huge one, in my opinion. 8 says that they're determining the design standards as specifically provided. So I don't know what this I don't know what that means. Determining the design standards, when I look at our design standards guidelines that was adopted by the city council in our general plan, is this what we need? It ought to say, and I don't believe, my opinion, with all due respect to the design review committee, that they ought to be the ones designing that, and they can change it willy-nilly. Not that they would, but they could. In other words, they can certainly be, somewhere it needs to say a design guideline, a design standards needs to be adopted by design, planning, city council, and we have it. Not that they get to determine the design standards under these sections, because these sections are signs and buildings and trash enclosures, and it goes on and on. It's everything. That is the key to exactly what they're doing. I think they would like more guidance. And I don't know if this is even in existence anymore, or is this thrown out? So we need a new one. So we need to somehow set up that a design guideline, design standards, whatever we're gonna call it, needs to be adopted by the design review committee with input from planning commission and adopted by city council. Now that maybe goes without saying, but this isn't even, capitalized. It just says determine design standards.
If I can add some clarification, so it says as specifically provided, there are provisions in those sections, so those specific sections that are cited there state in the current code that the design review committee shall develop standards for a specific item, specific task or
Correct.
project. So
But
this
one
is-
of them, 5.2, is trash enclosures, the next one is news racks, the next one, it says building,
right.
but I mean, it's
So
very,
but my point is,
specific.
they are tasked under the current code already with creating design standards for those things in those sections. And all this sentence is supposed to do in number 8 is, in their powers and duties, point out that they have those powers under the code so that it's clear and you don't have to go searching for their powers that are, already there in the
Okay.
code. So,
this is just limited teams. It's not saying they're going to determine the design standards, only the design standards on trash enclosures.
Right, as
news
specifically
things,
provided.
Specifically right there.
so it's really just saying, look at these sections, this section has designated the design review committee with this power, and here's where to look.
And again, in a perfect world, you'd have a design guideline standard, and it would have trash enclosures in it, which this does, and it would have our newspaper racks in there, so that everybody could go to one book, and they are going to enforce that under the guidelines. I mean, again, we're listing 3 things, and they do that many things,
And
everything.
If I may just chime in for everybody's and the public's knowledge as well as part of this hearing, so there's no confusion. The city is currently undergoing the general plan update, which there is a design element, which is something that Solomon decided to have a long time ago. So that's being re-looked at through that bigger conversation. So the design element, which those design guidelines approved by the BAR, will be updated, and then it will be up to the city, including the city council, planning commission, the DRC, to potentially develop additional updated document like the design guidelines that you mentioned. So that's happening as a parallel.
So I'm aware, I am aware of it. It just seemed kind of odd that we're specifically setting this out when we are doing, because I'm on that general plan thing
Right,
too. That we
right.
gotta look at that whole design thing. And to me, I look at it, it's a bolded number 8 that it says any exterior lighting, and then it says this. I'm like, gosh, they do a lot more than that. And I don't know if something can be said, well, I guess it says in any other applicable sections of Title 5, 10, and 11, 5, 8, 10, and 11, so maybe that covers it. I just want to it clarifies it for me, explaining that. But you see where I'm going. I just really want to make sure that we're all aware of how much power that they have over these items, not just those.
And this is supposed to help with that in the sense that you look at the section that has their duties and responsibilities, and it's pointing you to the sections of the code that have given them certain specific powers. And this grouping just happens to be design standards, instances under the code in which they've been tasked with coming up with design standards.
Okay,
In my mind, that does not preclude the city from collecting those and holistically presenting them in a design guideline that's easier to use.
good.
But this is really just to add a helpful cross-reference so that when you go look at their powers and duties under the code, it's very clear where all that is spelled out.
Just for my sake, clarification, do these design standards still exist, or are they not there anymore?
So when DRC was formed, it basically inherited everything from the BAR. Those design guidelines that say BAR and then still, those are the guidelines that the DRC applies in review of all of their
So they're
projects.
still in effect?
And it's
Correct.
under this too, it's under the general plan design, you know, it's.
Yeah, I knew that, I
Yeah.
didn't know if that got
Correct. Yes.
And we,
sidelined.
and we provide, we have multiple copies in the office, and we're working with anyone that's heading to the design review committee. We provide copies, go over it with them, and make sure they understand what the process is for preparing their documents for the DRC review.
Okay. I've only got two more. If we go to, I don't even know what it is, 11.11.7. 11.11.7, and then the next page where the box is. I don't know what that's under B. B with the boxes. And I see where we took out second residential units. Is that where ADUs will be? Will we put an ADU kind of section in there, or
So
where it'll have its own down there under 11.12.4?
I can help with that, and Lori can feel free to jump in too, but the city at this point has made the decision and said, because ADU law has been evolving so rapidly at the state level, to not try to pass, or try to implement a specific ADU ordinance in our code, because the state law, again, has been changing rapidly and just keeps preempting everything that cities try to do. So this change is really just to get rid of the old language about second residential units. We're not gonna replace it with ADU language. The city just implements what is provided for under state law.
Would it clarify, and can we say ADUs, whatever state law is, that's what we're doing? So that if somebody's looking through, what's their second residential ADU? Oh, it's whatever the state is. It's not here, so it must be what the state's doing. I don't know, I'm just wondering, again, to make it easier for lay folks to understand. I agree, that's what we have to do. We couldn't keep up with them anyways. We tried, we've given up.
And then in that case, you probably would want to have a definition section.
Correct,
And then it goes to
right.
that reference.
And just reference
that says
up.
it goes to state law.
Yeah, if they change in July, guess what? It's what it is, the latest and greatest, right?
Correct.
The last thing, last section I have is the last page of this section, which is 11.7B1, purpose of intent. B is processing. 2, if we're going to address the 1,500 square feet, we should address it there too. And I don't have the language, but if you guys came up with something for a max of 1,500 square feet over whatever you want to say, life of it, or 10 years, or 20, whatever you want. Whatever you think is reasonable.
Those provisions are parallel, so we
Yes,
should
correct.
match them.
They're
Yeah.
both. And then my general statement is just, I wish that, and maybe it's too late now, I don't know where we're at in the process. I sure wish that that we could have had a joint meeting with the design review committee. 2 of them are here, I know maybe they don't have any interest in that, to just make sure that they don't, that we're doing what they're wanting us to do, and maybe by them not speaking, they're happy with everything of these changes, just so that we don't have to come back again later and say, gosh, I wish we all could have sat around and had a conversation, so the city council feels really good that both bodies have figured this out along with staff. So that's just a general statement, but maybe nobody else feels
I
feels
agree
that
with
way.
that.
And I'm not trying to delay it, I'm just saying,
I
you know.
think we should have met together.
So those are my little question clarifications on this. I feel a lot better than I did before, because we saw it was just mostly housekeeping, just a few changes. The power things on the design review is a big one, and then some clarifications.
Does the rest of the planning commission have any comment on joint meeting with the DRC?
I have,
I just have a quick,
go ahead.
Yeah, the only comment that I had regarding this part was, we kind of touched on it with the general plan, is when we make all these changes, are you putting the cart before the horse? Because when the general plan comes in, how does that affect all this? Because you're making changes now, when something big and grander is coming in the next 6 months, year, whenever that comes into effect. So how does that pertain to all this?
Right, so these are the changes that are based on what's already changed, so we're trying to capture the conditions that we are working under now. Yes, when the general plan is completed and updated, there will likely be additional changes to zoning codes as well.
But also, I think that in the interim, what originated some of this was the DRC wanting clarification on their role, and that getting that clarification, staff felt was important to do that sooner rather than later. And, the general plan's not necessarily gonna spell that process isn't necessarily gonna touch that, even though there might be other code amendments that come out of it, further cleanup or adjustments, what have you. But that piece is, important to help them do their job, and we felt it was important to bring it forward.
Yeah, I'd like to say, I wanted to.
I have just a couple small things. Under 1118, 4 and 5, it refers to the manager. Should that be planning manager? It's in there 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 times.
So that is a nuance of, is it chapter title 18 there? So I think it's chapter 18 of title 11. That has its own definition section. So there's the definition section for all of title 11, and then chapter 18 has another sub-definition section, and that manager is defined there to be the planning manager. And that is how it is in the current code. It was director is defined as the planning director. So we certainly could take that definition out and put planning manager, but we kind of went with the most minimal change we could and just kept that structure
Okay,
in
so that-
title 18.
So it's already defined.
As manager means planning manager, yeah.
Okay. Other than agreeing with a lot of Aaron's comments, I didn't have anything else other than that. So, Joni, did you have anything?
Aaron and I talked a little bit.
No, okay. Collaborative effort.
Well, is there any interest in, maybe not even from the BR, of having a joint session? Is that worthless? Is it silly to do? I'd like.
You could open the public comment if you wish.
Okay, well, let's reopen then. Somebody want to speak on this? Patrick?
And why don't you join me tonight? Yes, thank you. I'm Patrick Kavanaugh. I am the chairman right now of the Design Review Committee. And I appreciate your attention to this matter, and I appreciate the staff's efforts to address an issue that we saw within the last year, as during kind of our first year of operation, that the process needed to be streamlined. It was cumbersome and confusing for the Design Review Committee. It was perhaps for the Planning Commission. It was perhaps a burden for the staff. But most importantly, it was confusing and frustrating for applicants that are coming to the city and asking for approval to operate within this beautiful city. There still are some issues. I think Commissioner Peterson, raised the issues about the design review standards that are there. I think it's 1988, and in addition to the standards that you described here, the new section or subsection 8, determining design standards as provided for in the following sections. That's the new 8. The old one is developing aesthetic standards and requirements for properties within the village area of the city. I mean, that's
sort of the heart of what we do, and I think was meant. They use the term aesthetic standards, but they're design standards. And what it doesn't say, and probably should, is that those standards should be approved by the city council. It doesn't. And so I'm not suggesting that, well, I am suggesting that's another, an amendment perhaps that's worthwhile. I think it's also, I know that the members of the Design Review Committee, all of them, I comfortably speak on behalf of all of them, and I know our Vice Chair, Esther's got some comments as well. But I think that it is would be welcome for an opportunity for us to have a session to talk over some of these issues, so we know when we're done with this, that all of our concerns are as well addressed as they can be. Esther?
Esther Jacobson Bates from the Design Review Committee. I concur. We think there would be a great benefit to meet together. We could address all these questions and get staff input and legal input all at once, and also be able to take that back to City Council. I want to echo our chair's comments in regards to determining standards. That is not the job that we want. We want to interpret and apply the current standards, make advice or make recommendations for revisions. It has been difficult. The reason we're even here is because our committee, being new committee, all new members, really needed much more definition as to exactly what our duties are, the process, and the limitations as well. And a lot of this grew out of the applicant's frustration, frankly, with the process. And to the credit of staff, that was very difficult during the course of COVID and a lack of staff to address it. But now we're moving forward and we have an opportunity to do a lot of clarifying. And this is an important opportunity, and I am sure it will change significantly, well, or at least change once the general plan is in place. And also that the general plan has the opportunity to give us much clearer guidelines for both of our committees. I was very pleased to see that there was an incorporation of details about the recommendations being considered strongly by your group, so that we weren't just merely an advisory body where you could dismiss our recommendations, because we take our job seriously. And to that extent, our committee of 5, it's a great committee. I'm really impressed. Everybody comes prepared and does their homework and works really well together and has the best interests of the community at heart. And we want to work with you and know how we can all work to the best of our community together and make this an easier process for the applicants and all of us. So yes, let's have a joint meeting. Any questions that you have for us? And I'm speaking for myself, but I think that I reflect some of the opinions of the committee as well. Questions that Chair or I? Thanks.
So do we want to request a joint meeting for sending this to the city council?
I would like to. I don't know if we don't have a motion, or we just say, could we have one?
You
tell
can
us.
just give general direction, and there is a DRC meeting coming up on the 17th of February. So in 10 days from now, we could still place that on the agenda for the 17th if majority of you are available.
We'll check.
Just if you can we can communicate after this meeting
And
and
if
see
not,
what
it would
date.
go to maybe the next meeting.
Or have a special session.
Meeting, okay.
I would probably recommend a special session just because we want to move forward with this and get this item to City Council so that we have clarity in how we will process applications going forward.
And in preparation for that, does the commission feel that we should have Aaron's and I guess Joni's comments included before that meeting or by that meeting?
We can take all comment from today and make modifications.
Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, I sure didn't have, I didn't have a lot of substantive changes, it was mostly some questions.
Yeah, no, I guess I would just want to make sure that that was the the majority of you were in agreement with the comments that.
That's exactly what I was trying to get at.
Yeah, so if we can, if we get that direction, then we're happy to make those changes before the joint meeting.
So should we make a motion to table this until that meeting for the joint session? For this agenda item this evening?
I would ask our assistant city attorney.
So the way we brought this before you was with a recommendation to adopt a resolution. You also, as an alternative, can provide further direction to staff. So you don't have to do a motion, but certainly you can do a motion, and a clean way to do it would be to move to have a joint session and reflect the comments made by Planning Commissioner Peterson, and then that, provides very clear direction to staff. But
Okay,
I don't think a motion is required.
I'll make that motion, make it
I'll
easy.
second it.
Motion made and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's 4-0. Okay, let's move on to item B. Can we get the staff report on item B?
So item B is once again a continuation of discussion that you held on December 6th. Staff has, you provided a lot of general comment at that meeting. Staff has taken that comment and has worked through developing specific recommendations, and Chelsea and Lori will present that.
Okay, so again, as Zena said, this was already before you, but we've done a lot of work since then to come up with more specific recommendations based on your helpful comments. Your staff report has, kind of explains the current requirements, but at this point, we are recommending that the solving code be updated to allow accessory structures in the side and rear yard setbacks of residential districts, and allow them to be next to the principal structure, but maintain at least a 5-foot open access, setback from the property line on the side and rear yards. And this should allow most small accessory structures, but still provide enough access and make sure that things aren't going to be blocked off. Per your recommendation to consider a scaling of a setback based on the size of the shed, we have proposed that for sheds that are 12 feet or less, that it's 5 feet, and a minimum of 5 feet, but for sheds that are larger than 12 feet, that there be a minimum of a 10-foot setback. So for some properties, that probably means they're limited to a small shed on their side yard, but they can still have an accessory structure there. It's just they have to, there's more limitations on the size. And just to be clear, that calibration is only based on the height of the shed. So some 12-foot sheds, if they're, some of those will be permitted, but that's once you get into the bigger ones. And then, making sure I hit all the highlights here. And then we're also went through the code and cleaned up the language where there were some provisions that said, the entire setback has to be open from the ground to the sky. So we've clarified and cleaned that up, that in residential districts, you need to look at the accessory structures section, and that language controls. But again, based on your direction, we're only making adjustments to residential side yard and rear yard setbacks. So those clearances for the provisions that say, it has to be clear from the ground to the sky would still apply in other zones, because we were not given direction to address other zones.
So, a picture's worth 1,000 words, so we'd like to just go through illustrations. You do have copies of them there. Basically, within the city of Solvang, we have a range of lot sizes. There are some that are in the 5,000 to 6,000 square foot range. Those lots mostly have 50-foot frontages. And so you, basically the ordinance is 10% the width of the lot or 5 feet. In those cases, what really is one of the driving factors of this is the fire department is requesting a 5-foot clearance around the side of buildings. So in this case, we would not allow sheds to be in the side yards in this situation like this. Now, a house can be, as you can kind of see where niches are shown on this particular one, if that niche has more than 5 feet from the property line, you could put a shed in that area. But for the most part, sheds that are 12 feet or less would be 5 feet around in the rear yard. If they go taller than 5 feet, it would, 12 feet, sorry, yes, then it would be a 10-foot setback. And part of it is because what people can see from their backyards into other people's yards, if you get larger sheds, you know, it's a nuisance, and it's perceived as a nuisance in some cases. So if we can go to the next slide. Again, here's another example, 7,000 square foot lot with a 70-foot frontage. You have, the required setback is 7 feet on both sides, but for sheds, you could go down to 5 feet as long as you have that, 5-foot clearance. So you could get a 2-foot, I would say rake shed or something that you could put up against your house along that side yard setback. But in the rear yard, it's 5 feet all the way around for a 12-foot or less shed. If it's more than 12 feet high, then it's a 10-foot setback. And the whole green area illustrated in all of these is considered the rear yard. And any shed or structure in the rear yard could only cover 40% of the rear yard area. So the next slide. This one goes to 8,000 square feet. There's quite a bit of Selving that's in the 8,000 square foot range. And again, the requirement is 8-foot side yard setbacks. So you could get a 3-foot wide shed in that area and still be able to get approved. But if it's more than 10 feet, then your rear yard, you'd have a 10-foot setback.
Tammy, just for clarification, you mean that black little square that's
Yes,
filled in?
that's an
is what you're-
illustration of the
is
shed.
What you're pointing out, yeah, just wanna make sure.
Correct. And then, as you get to the perimeter of Selvang, there are much larger lots. There's 10 and 20,000 square foot lots. So the next slide. And so the maximum setback is required at 10 feet. So you could have a larger shed along the side of the lot. But if it does go higher than the 12 feet, then it needs to meet the 10-foot setback. This is much more restrictive than before, and but I think much clearer as to how to address the concerns that have been raised over the last year or so in regards to sheds and accessory structures. A good example of one that would be higher than 12 feet is we've seen RV covers structures, and so those we really have to take a look at how they relate to the neighbor and how they relate to the lot, and those are usually on much bigger lots, and they end up being in the backyard. We don't want them right up against the side yard because they could easily be 15 to 20 feet high, and so we're recommending this additional setback.
Another piece I wanted to point out, Lori mentioned the 40% in the rear yard setback. We've also tried to come up with a similar coverage maximum in the side yard to avoid, a whole string of smaller ones that they could fit in there, but then all of a sudden you've got 10 little sheds or something in your side yard and it becomes excessive. So we've tied, because the side yard is smaller, so it didn't make sense to say 40% of the side yard, because the math just didn't work out with having a structure that made sense with a 5-foot, corridor and a percentage of the side yard total coverage. So we've tied that to the maximum lot coverage, if there is one specified for the district. And then if there isn't a maximum lot coverage for the district, then the provisions say that accessory structures shall not be placed in the side yard if that accessory structure that's at issue for that they're thinking about placing, plus all the other buildings on the site, would occupy more than 30% of the total lot. Including the house, yeah, exactly. So that's to try to get at, we don't want to cover every possible square inch of the side yard that they could with a shed, while still, allowing for them to put some sheds in place.
Thank you. Any questions?
Is it still 10 foot from the house?
No, that has been removed or changed for residential as well. So they can have the structures up against the building. When we talked to fire, they were concerned with access, but not the sheds touching or
Okay.
being adjacent to
Clarify,
the
because
building.
we thought fire wanted that, remember? Yeah.
The
Interesting.
concern that they had was getting their ladders around the building and having the angle to get to the roof, and they thought it was more important to have the sheds up against the house with that 5-foot clear zone for their maneuverability.
Okay, what do we do about the sheds that are next to the house that have a door between the house and the shed?
That is a special case.
People living in the shed, in other words. And they have access to the main house.
I think when somebody's living in it, it's no longer an accessory structure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that
I
would be
thought
a
it
different
said
thing.
something to that effect in here, that this ordinance doesn't cover
Accessory dwelling units, that's
accessory
correct.
dwelling units or units that people live in.
I'm not
And,
talking about legal things, I'm talking about illegal things.
Right, so if it has somebody living in it and it's supposed to be a garden shed, that's a different problem. Like they have an unpermitted illegal ADU, right?
Code enforcement.
Yeah, that would be a code enforcement issue. That's not gonna be addressed by this because this section is talking about what's permissible for an accessory structure like a shed in the side yard. And somebody living in a shed is not gonna be okay.
Oh, I know that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it does exist though.
Right, and that would be a violation under the current code and under the code after if you recommend these changes to city council and city council approves them.
Question on the 3 feet. I was trying to understand that. So it's 5 feet, but then you could go within 3 feet with, I don't even know what some of these are. I know what a buttress is. I don't know what a sill is. I mean, if fire wanted 5 feet, but then we say you could put a chimney out there, you would have a chimney,
So,
ornamental features, but in no case 3 feet. Now we've eliminated that it's right against the house. We go 5 feet, but you can go to 3 feet. Is fire okay with going to 3 feet? And that's enough for them to get their ladders and their people through. It's not 5 feet, now it's 3.
So that's a carryover from previous zoning, or the existing zoning designations where architectural features can encroach closer to the side yard fence, but they're basically being served from inside the house. That's, and whether it's a bay window or it's a fireplace or it's a structure, it's being served by the inside, it's being sprinklered, it's being taken care of from the inside. And they usually, I believe, can only be 8 feet of the side yard setback.
so, yeah, I agree with you that the chimney is a little bit of an incongruous reference in this context. We were trying to be consistent with where this language appears in other places in the code, but I agree that we probably should have deleted the chimney reference, because there won't be a chimney on a garden shed.
But it also, in going back to the existing code, never said you could go to 5 feet, it said it was at 10 feet. And then you could go 3 feet, so you still had 7. We've moved it to 5, plus,
Right.
now it's down to 3.
Yeah.
I'm just, as long as you guys have checked with fire and fire goes 3 feet is perfect,
Yeah.
I don't have an issue with it,
So-
especially when it's the low ones at 12 feet. But as long as 3 feet's good, I'm okay with it.
So fire was comfortable with it from my understanding, and I think something to keep in mind is these, like an eave, would extend, the
Sure.
length of the accessory structure, but it's, above a certain height, so you can still pass under it. Something like a buttress might go to the ground, but it's usually, which a buttress tends to be something that supports,
Mhm.
exterior support for a wall. It's not gonna be along the entire length of the building. You might have to jog around it a little bit, but, so fire was comfortable with that.
That's good.
But we certainly could clean up the chimney reference.
And again, we didn't limit it to the 120. The 120 square feet and the 12 feet is still, anything bigger than that, you need a building permit for.
Correct, that has not changed.
That has not changed. So if somebody was to do an accessory structure that was 11 feet or 12 feet, but it was 150 feet, they need a building permit.
Correct.
They would then have to come before, and you'd say, can't I go to within 5 feet of the property line? And I guess staff would make that determination that you could have a 300-foot, make it up, 300 square foot accessory structure 5 feet to the property line, right against the house. I mean, that would be a staff decision. It doesn't come to us for that. It's not any,
We're kind of getting into some details. Maybe we can stop here and open for public comment, and then we can bring it back and
Fine.
discuss this further.
Yep.
So is there anybody that would like to speak on this item? I have no speaker slips, so anybody here?
Hello, my name is Chris Horn. I spoke earlier with community comment on this topic. First off, thank you very much for the consideration, the analysis, and the recommendation as put forward. My primary comment would be that based on the shed scenarios in our neighborhood, most sheds are small sheds, right? I would say that what's been addressed here is at best like medium, large, very large, right? The number there is basically if it's, it's right on the line of, sorry about that. It's supposed to be silented. As to whether or not a permit would be required, right? So I guess our ask would be, in terms of that gradation, what we were really looking for was on the smaller side. Some of these are literally like rake sheds. I mean, a rake shed's not a big deal because you can typically move it, it doesn't have a pad under it. But I've got, neighbors that have, 40 square foot sheds, right? They're 8 feet or less in height. And a common approach that we saw in other municipal code was to say if it's under a certain height or the profile to the fence line, is low enough that you could have it closer to the fence, right? Or that that property line setback, which is typically where the fence is, would be not applicable. And so I'm just saying that in this current scenario, that still affects, maybe up to half, or at least a third or 40% of people here. It doesn't affect, me directly, but I'm just saying these are common scenarios, on real houses. We're not concerned with, large trailer covers or, these very large things. We're just concerned with people not having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to move something. And you could have a shed that's 8 feet high and it's 4 feet off the fence line. So that's kind of another secondary question that may not be appropriately asked to you versus city council, but I guess the secondary question would be, is there a variance or process to get an exception for an as-built structure, that would take that is not a concern of the fire department, that has greater than 5 feet clearance in terms of access, but in terms of not requiring it to be, moved at great expense to the homeowner based on this. So that was a comment and I guess a question. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I was just talking about. How long, how big can these sheds be? And again, we're doing this citywide. It's not just you guys. It can be other lots, then maybe everyone up there has those small ones, but tomorrow or next month, somebody puts in 3 of them together, and all of a sudden they're 36 feet by 8 feet, and they're 5 feet, and then 3 feet from it is, and so our code has always said, under 12 and under 120, you don't need a building permit. Over that, you need a building permit. Do we address the square footage in this? We've addressed the height, or do we just let it go to you guys who are giving the building permit, and you guys are gonna make that decision? And I'm okay with that, if that's how it's set up. I assume that is how it's set up, and staff would make that decision to issue a building permit or not for larger sheds. That's the one. The second is this gentleman's question about if they have some existing sheds, and clarify that, not less than 3 feet to the property line, because you can go to 3.
So let's say, for example, there's a, 60 square foot shed that's 8 feet high and it's 4 feet off the property line. As written here, it would still be an exception to the modified new code. And I guess the question is, on 4 people in that position, is there a process to say, can this be permitted or accepted as is? I mean, it's not technically a permit, but does it not require spending $2,000 to move break up a cement pad, move it 1 more foot further away, right, and relocate the existing structure?
But it's still more than 3 feet away.
Still more, well, in this case, yeah, like if it's 4 feet off the fence line,
Then that
the
would-
code calls for 5.
Then wouldn't that meet this?
5.
Or it's 5 with the buttress thing?
And
I'm so sorry.
And here's another point, is that, there was discussion of 5 feet of, passageway clearance for firemen, but this seems to kind of implicitly assume that it has to be against the fence line, as opposed to 5 feet of clearance. Like, I've got a 20-foot side yard, right? There's 10, 15 feet in there to work with. Does that 5 feet, this seems like it's written that it kind of implies that, well, that 5 feet will always at least be on the fence line. But in most, normal sightings of small sheds like this, putting it up against the fence of your property line is kind of where you do it. So that's the ask, is can small sheds, below a certain height, and especially in this case, there were actually no neighbor complaints, right? Nobody's offended by these. We're just trying to avoid having to waste a lot of money, moving things that otherwise don't hurt anyone. So it's the small shed allegation.
If I can just suggest that we make sure or hear other public commenters before we do any further discussion on those comments.
Good idea. Would anybody else like to speak? Anybody online? Oh,
Good evening, I'm Rovi Butcher. It seems like, so with the planning board's recommendation to now allow the shed to be put next to the primary residence, will that then make sheds that are along the fence now non-compliant in moving forward? And if people did complain about those, will they be cited in moving forward? So it's costing more money for the city to address homes that have their sheds in the side yard now along the fence, because it no longer will be in compliance with the new recommendations that you are recommending. Yes, and I think, like what Chris was saying, is that our ask in the beginning would be to, as long as there is a clear path for the firefighters to get through and put out a fire, I think that was the more important thing. And now, like what Chris mentioned, the board is clearly stating that that clear passage should be along the property of the fence line instead of just in between the fence and the house. So it seems like it's getting more, the demands are are harder on us where our side yards are not that big. We don't have a lot of room to make these requirements that have been presented with the board department, the planning department, because we don't have a huge side yard. So it just seems harder for us to abide by the new recommendations that the planning board the staff has brought here tonight. And that's just all I gotta say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments, people who wish to speak? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Anybody want to go ahead, Justin?
The first speaker, Chris, and our second, Mrs. Butcher, I think they do bring up valid points as far as the financial cost and the burn, because it is kind of confusing. Whereas for like my particular state, I did get notice from the city, because you can see it from the street, the shed. But it's below, it's below 12 feet, it's below the square footage that is, needing a permit. And not only that, when I got the house, it was as-built, it was there already. So, that being said, it's away from the house, it's about 10 feet from the house, but it's closer to the fence, but it's within the setback. So I got a notice, people like this, we're just confused. So I hear their complaint. And I don't know if they should worry about the fence line, so it sounds like it's okay against the house, but not against the house, so I think that needs to be cleared up, of where.
So if I could speak to the notices went out and the way this process went, there were some complaints of different issues at the Skid Mesa, if you would remember. We came to the Planning Commission for your recommendations and went to City Council for their direction, and they told us to enforce the code. In applying the code, looking through some of the sheds that were brought forward to the city, there was a determination that a number of these sheds were potentially not in compliance. And most of the property owners have been working with the code enforcement officer on looking at bringing those into compliance. Later on, the City Council directed us to stop enforcement actions until we could bring this process forward, have the recommendations from the Planning Commission again, and come back with recommendations to the City Council to potentially make modifications to the city code. So that's where we are today. There are some sheds that would be not in compliance under the current code amongst those that we were looking at, and there may be some sheds with these new proposed guidelines that may be not in compliance with the new guidelines. But what we are proposing to you today, or these recommendations, were developed via review of, with the fire department, with the building official, planning staff, attorney staff, to come up with the best recommendation that might alleviate the most concerns and provide people with the most flexibility to have sheds.
Is it listening, and trying to close your eyes and visualize this, if you tell me, I would feel comfortable saying that we have two levels of sheds. The 12 is what we always use for the permit, so that's the max. And that has to be 5 feet from the property line with those little stick outs, if they have those little chimneys and things, whatever they have. But if it's an 8-foot roof height, if that's a number that is the next increment down, it could be within 3 feet of the property line, as long as there's a minimum of 5 feet between it and the house. That's kind of where we're going, I think. So that, but I wouldn't want to see it closer to 3 feet. I'm very sympathetic toward the folks that have sheds, but you also have a neighbor who wouldn't want the 12-foot shed 3 feet maybe from the property line. And it's amazing, we have to get a permit for a fence over 6 feet, and yet we can go to 12 feet with these sheds and we don't have to get a permit. So we don't wanna, and there's a reason that you don't want an 8-foot or 10-foot fence on a property line, because the neighbor, you're blocking their view, their sunlight, their wind, whatever it is that it is, it's their view. So we need to pull it back some amount, so it's not against it, if 3 feet works, and then if it lowers to an 8 instead of a 12, if that's the compromise, sure works for me, as long as the fire's got the 5 feet between the house and the, I didn't mean to say, I don't think we did or staff, that they gotta be against the house. We were just saying, put it out there and give us 5 feet. And so, but now when you look at it, you say a short little fence, or could be closer than the 5, as long as the fire's okay with the 5 in between the house and it. I don't know if that works or not. Does that make sense?
Well, you're talking about 5 feet from the house?
All you need, I don't care, what, I don't
I
care.
can't believe the fire department is saying you're gonna do those sheds of it, fence the house.
Yeah, but if it's a little rake shed or something, people put them up against the house.
I can't, I can't believe that.
I assume they did, because we specifically asked that you talk with the fire department.
Yes, we did meet with the fire department staff, and we went over different scenarios, and their preference was to have a clear line along the fence, at least 5 feet, because that gives them the angle for their ladders, there they can go anywhere along the side to go up to the roof. And so that's what we're proposing. If the sheds are up against the fence, depending on where the fire is, it's blocking where they can post the ladder to go up into the roof line. And so we just accommodated their request in these suggested design standards and setbacks.
This is just the fire people that you talk to here. This isn't California Fire Code that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, again, if it's, assuming that it's passing muster with fire department, county fire, whoever is saying 5 feet is what they need, they're not necessarily saying 5 feet to the property line, or they are. They are saying 5 feet to the property line. It just seems, it seems illogical, because I could fill my 5 foot with trees and you'd never get through it, and shrubs and everything else, and wheelbarrows and whatever I wanted to put over there, so that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But if that's what they say, then are our hands tied, and we are tied then to a 5 foot minimum, because fire safety says you must have 5 feet from property line to a shed. Is that?
We can go back and confirm with them but this is the discussion that we had with the fire department here. County Fire is our service area, and this was their recommendation.
Everyone's lot is different too, so it's not like a one-size-fits-all solution, because these that you laid out are pretty cookie cutter, it's just a square, polygon, whereas some people have odd shape, or they're on a corner lot, and some lots I've seen are pie-shaped even.
Correct.
So, that being said, I mean, it just doesn't seem fair to the people that have those kinds of shapes, and then they have to move. That's a financial burden to those people, so I hear what they're saying. It's like for myself, I'm just using myself as an example. I bought the house, it was there, it seemed like it's legit, looks legit, and now I get a letter in the mail, hey, this may have to come down. It's like it is a financial burden to these people, especially if they had in place.
I mean, without having, like I said, I wouldn't mind going to the 3 feet as long as there's 5 feet between the house and a shed. So you can put it any way. Unless fire absolutely says you cannot do that, you have to have 5 feet from property line to the shed, then our hands are tied. We can't overrule fire. We're not gonna have the, that's the question. It's to just ask it in writing that it has to be a 5 foot setback from, to have an accessory anything. If it is, there's nothing we can do. We can't, I would never be able to feel comfortable voting for that if that's, and then the house burns down and somehow the city's liable for it. I mean, I don't know if we can just get a quick clarification. I don't mean tonight, but if they would allow the 3 and the 8 foot and the 5 to kind of meet what these smaller ones are and not make them put them against the house, and but as long as they meet safety, I'm fine with that.
We can certainly get more clarification from the fire department about whether our understanding from our discussion previously was they wanted it along the fence line, but we can go back and ask them for clarification on, some of these more nuanced examples that you all are giving, and to confirm whether it's something that's coming out of the state fire code versus that's their operational
And
preference.
Sheds are not that big, not that wide, usually 8 feet at the most. And if you've got a 20-foot house, they could put their ladders on either side of that 8-foot shed.
Yeah, I think it is a challenge. I mean, not all lots are the same, so we're trying to come up with a general standard to
Correct.
apply across the whole city. And that is difficult because the lots are they're not all, we're not on a straight grid here. So we definitely welcome your input on, if there's pieces that, certain size, really tiny sheds that you want to just allow anywhere, we can get the clarification from fire, but if there's subsets of types of sheds that you can provide some specific direction on, we would greatly appreciate it. Because it was a struggle, I think, to try to come up with these standards that would work across the whole city, so.
Well, and again, from fire, is it requested or required? If it's required, I get it. If it's requested, I'm for the 3 foot and the 5 foot on the other side. So that to me is the crux. The rest of the details of it seem really, really good. I don't have any issues with that at all, with how you folks laid it out. And if lowering it to 8 feet and getting closer works.
And then, is it okay, it seems like they've had more questions, are you gonna open up the camera? Some feedback?
Yeah, well, I just want to make sure everybody here has made a comment. I saw a couple hands up. I'll open it up again for public comment if.
So I guess a quick statement. We're just trying to get this resolved, right, to the city's satisfaction and on behalf of affected homeowners. There were no complaints against these homeowners, right? They came in because somebody referenced people with sheds around their block. So it's quite random who got pulled in here. 2 proposals. One, we had a recommendation, in the original proposal that basically accounts for all of these scenarios that have been discussed. It just talks about, 5-foot clearance for fire egress, fire safety, and then it calls for 8'6" height and below. We're asking for that it be allowed up against, the fence line directly. And that solves like all of these problems. So that's statement 1. It should be fairly solvable, and you're welcome to talk with us directly, and, if you want to, think about modifying the recommendation. The other idea there, because I know it's, I applaud the effort to say, I don't want a neighbor with 20 sheds in the back or 40% of the, the lot covered. I mean, there's certain silliness that you want to try and rule out, and I appreciate that. But part of that is that it's supposed to be a complaint-based system, right? So it's okay for the code to be a bit more restrictive, and it's only if a neighbor is offended or a firefighter drives by and sees a fire safety issue, then you take action, right? But so it's okay to have a little bit more restrictive code as long as it's actually complaint-driven, which our cases are not. So the question is, you can, improve the code as you're discussing here, but then perhaps work with some of the neighbors that have, as-is stuff to basically say, if it's not a fire safety issue, the fire department inspects the property and they say it's just fine, and they have no complaining neighbors, perhaps we close the enforcement actions and we're gone, right? That's all we're interested in, is to solve the problem for us and also not have it recur for other residents in the city. So, thank you.
Anybody else? You had your hand up.
I'm not sure what's more important, 5 feet from the house or 5 feet from property line as far as fire safety issue. So since we don't have that, do we have a choice? Can we have a choice? Either 5 feet from the property line or 5 feet from the house for firefighters to get up in the ladder, which firefighters can anyway, because that's what they're doing. trained to do that. So that's my question, sorry. Another one is, does the city, or this might be a city council question, when a complaint comes through, does the staff check for the validity of the complaint? Or just take it as a complaint? As far as no one's being injured, there's no bodily harm, no one's being affected by this code, just someone who was out of spite, tried to randomly snitch on other people. So that's the thing. How are complaints processed? Are they just, people come in, anyone can call in and say, hey, I have a list of homes here that are out of compliance, send your code enforcer? I mean, is that what we want to, in moving forward? That's exactly what we are here, trying not to, we want to stop that. We want to move forward and try to resolve it. Our sheds are a lot smaller than what the board is suggesting. I think we are 8 feet and under, and 120 square footage and under. So the proposals here tonight seem to be on the grander scale, and it doesn't really, it's harder for us to work with those recommendations. Yeah, thank you.
If you would like to check if anybody online, there's some public.
Okay. Is there anybody online that would like to speak?
If you'd like to speak, raise your hand or unmute yourself.
I did that a couple times before. I'm wondering if we approve this or recommended it to the city council, and taking into account some of the comments about enforcement. I know that if a complaint is lodged, that there is an investigation that goes on. It just isn't an automatic citation that somebody from the building department goes out.
I could address
The
that.
building official that we talked about earlier goes out and, you want to talk further
So
about that?
the city's code enforcement system is one that is not proactive. It's primarily based on complaints. There's definitely an investigation once a complaint is made as to validity and whether there's actually a violation of any part of the code. Depending on type of violation, it's usually the code enforcement that enforces. Sometimes it could be the building official if it's a building violation. We do not take or guarantee that anonymous complaints will be dealt with, because that just gets into that question of how do we investigate validity of a complaint. But the city definitely reserves the right to investigate any violations of the code without a complaint.
And then, following up on that, assuming that the complaint is valid, does the person that's being complained about have the option of appealing that decision, either to staff or the city council?
So depending on the type of complaint and violation, the city attorney is the chief prosecuting officer. So if it goes through all the steps, it's the city attorney that prosecutes.
Well, we're talking about sheds in particular.
So if a complaint is made about the sheds, for example, the code enforcement officer has been working with all of the properties that were reported as out of compliance. There are properties that were reported that are out of compliance. So if we were to continue to enforce, which is on pause right now, those actions would be taken, and if not brought into compliance, citations would be issued.
Right, and as part of that investigation, with sheds? Does that include having the fire department come out and look at it?
We would be investigating our code provisions, not any other provisions.
So what about like the common sense proposals that Chris had asked? It sounded reasonable to me and doesn't seem like it's a burden to the community to do so on a case-by-case basis to see which ones are within compliance and which ones are without. Is that something that's going to be happening?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question.
Well, he just came up and he said the solution is like certain ones, if the fire department could come out and say, hey, this is not a hazard, so it's okay, then, and it's the sheds within legal parameter, didn't need a permit, building permit to begin with, so then we can just go on our merry way at that point.
So we would still need the sheds to be within compliance of the city code, however that city code is
Right,
structured.
but then at the case-by-case basis, that, because all these people, like including myself, got a letter, I mean, it didn't need permits within the rights, you know, sides and everything, so it seems like it's legitimate, so now if we pass this, we're not sure, you know, what is the fire department saying on the fence line, not the fence line, so the people here are asking if they can have like a case-by-case basis. If the fire department could say, hey, that's fine, it's not a hazard, then why change it?
So I can help address that. A couple things. First off, the code as it is now says that the side yard has to be free and clear from the ground to the sky, right? And there has to be 10 feet between the house and the shed.
Right.
So all the sheds that we're talking about don't meet the current code requirements as far as I'm aware, right? At least with the sheds that have been described in the public comment. So these changes that we propose would address those issues and allow sheds in the side yards because we're carving out in residential areas and allowing for accessory structures as long as they meet certain requirements and avoiding those general prohibitions on anything obstructing the entire side yard setback. But Zena is right that whatever we ultimately do for the code, for your recommendation and then ultimately what city council decides to approve, sheds would need to be compliant with that. And, code enforcement is largely complaint driven, but the city can investigate and determine there's a violation even without a complaint. So that process would remain the same. And as far as, fire coming out and saying, okay, seems good, but it's still not consistent with the code, if there's an inconsistency with the code, that's the code enforcement officer's purview, not fire. So whether it's fire safe is a separate question from whether there's a code violation. And certainly we're trying to have the code be informed by the fire safety question, and staff will get more clarification on the exact parameters of that. But once the code is amended, then it will be applied as it's written.
And then what about clearances from a fence line? Because a lot of times, like I see in the city of Buellton, if you're driving out right by the Ford dealership, those people in those backyards, they have everything right up against play structures, sheds. Some of them are like 2 stories with windows in them. And so like that, you see our neighboring town next door, that's okay. But then the people in this town, like why can't it be up against a fence, especially if it's not necessarily a side yard, but it's still just a backyard?
So, this is going back in history, both Buellton and Solvang were under the county Santa Barbara jurisdiction. In the rear yard setback, there is no requirement for being anywhere, you can be up against the fence on both your rear line or your side yard in the rear yard. And that's what you're seeing along 246. Those were all built before the city incorporated. And so what we're doing is responding to what we heard from the community is that we don't want to, neighbors don't want to see sheds, neighbors don't want to see structures from their backyard or side yard. And so we're trying to anticipate what's going to happen in the future. And we're recommending that, for sheds that are 12 feet high, that they be 5 feet off the property. If they're larger than that, then they're 10 feet from the property line. And that gives you that separation of the side yards and the rear yard that we currently don't have. You can butt those big buildings up against both the side and rear yard property lines in the rear yard. One of the things is also, part of the setback issue is drainage off the roofs of the sheds. You know, if you put a shed right up against a property line, then you have potentially drainage going into the next person's yard.
Right.
So there's gotta be some kind of resolution here and an additional setback along particularly the rear yard. And, you know, consideration of what's happening on the side or what we're bringing forward to you as what we heard from the community. That doesn't resolve necessarily all of the issues that were dealt with in Skip Mesa. But I think the one thing that we could go back with Chelsea on is this issue of sheds that are, you know, 8 feet high. And, you know, maybe have one more demarcation where a shed that is less than 12, more in line with the fence height. Can that be a different metric? And I think we could look at that.
And just, again, and I'm not being disrespectful, but it's bigger than Skip Mesa. It's the entire town. It might have just been triggered by Skip Mesa, but we've got to look at it as everybody. If you guys had a homeowner association and we weren't abiding, you know, you guys do what you want, but it came to us, not because we wanted it to, but because people complained and it came, and then we've got to look at it citywide. And so we've got bigger lots, smaller lots. A lot of your lots are big. Some of these lots, like we said, are 5,000 square feet and small. I like the demarcation. I like the 2 levels. If we could get it closer because of it. I hadn't thought about water shutting off, going to a neighbor's yard if you're right on a 0 lot line. I hadn't even, you know, we're just trying to invent this thing and come up with it that works. The other question that I have is there, and one of the speakers spoke to it, is there a way to do variance for, what do we call them? We call them non-legal, non-conforming, legal non-conforming structures. And is there a way for the 10 or 15 or whatever that have gotten, or whoever comes in, if our code enforcement officer gets another complaint down in LSL Glen, is there a way for those that are as-built to be able to get a variance, and short of having fire department do a full investigation, but our code enforcement officer going over there, coming back and saying, yeah, that works, and he recommends to your staff that you find a variance for it. If that would solve some of the problems. I mean, in a general statement, and again, I'm not being disrespectful, but if enough people violate the law along the code, then all of a sudden it's, well, shoot, can't we just give them all variances? And so if we set this up, give variance, everyone up there got a variance, and we set this up, and in 5 years we're back here saying, well, can we just let everybody else have a variance too, because they built it and they didn't know, or they bought it because somebody else did it and they bought the house, and we feel bad for them, and then it keeps snowballing. This is the problem without really having a code enforcement, or at least education to them, not picking on staff. It's a tough one out there, and it's that old thing, you violate something long enough and then we just kind of roll with it and go, and that's not how we're supposed to do it. At the same time, I'm very sympathetic toward that neighborhood and what they're going through, and they had a CCNRs, they didn't have CCNRs, they had homeowners, they didn't, who's enforcing, who's not. I mean, they're kind of a unique situation. So I would like to, I don't know if there's a way to do variances on a case-by-case basis. Give them 6 months, you know, everyone, you come in with your variance, or 9 months, or whatever it is, and staff looks at the 10 or 15 or 6 or 8 or whatever there is, and come up with a solution for each individual case. And then do the bigger picture.
So, okay, so I'll respond from a planner's perspective. Variances are very difficult to approve, and it would not be at a staff level. We'd be bringing them to the planning commission. And so what we would probably be looking at is each one of the situations that are currently out there, can we craft something that accommodates those sheds that are out there, because right now they're technically not conforming, and see if there's a way that we can work this ordinance so that those sheds can stay the way they are. In most situations, I think we could probably do the other thing that you said, which was document when the shed was built. If it was, prior to the county incorporating or prior to a certain, or before the city incorporated, there's ways we could look at history of what's happened on that property to determine when those sheds were built. But in this case, I think we just need to go back one more time and look at what we can do to accommodate those units and those sheds. Some of them probably aren't gonna meet the requirements, but variances are really difficult to get approved.
And I should add, variances are not just, can I have an exception to the rule? It has to be, there are certain specific constraints on that property that means that even the application of the general rule has a disproportionate impact on that property. So a typical example would be you have a really unusually shaped lot, and so like a setback requirement means you can't build a house there at all, right? And so that would be something that where a variance would work, because you're basically denied what everybody else gets by the application of the general rule. So it's not a variance process, like the technical term in planning, is not going to help you just because you want your shed to be in a different spot. Okay?
And I would just once again add to that a little bit more, that I think what we're trying to have here is a policy decision as what's the best policy in the code that applies to the city. So the process is from policy perspective, application to the sheds versus every individual situation that might come up with sheds across the city becoming the driver for continuous review and basically lack of an ordinance.
I actually would agree with that. I don't think we can ever come up with an ordinance that's gonna please everybody. It's just not gonna happen. So we need to come up with something that is fair and reasonable. And there will be people that won't like it, there will be people that will love it. And so
I think in response to your comment, I think we can go back and respond again through the fire department. We can look at another metric within the shed height and sizes to see if we can reduce the setback in the side yard to a certain level. And also confirm whether it needs to be up against the fence or up against the home where we have that 5-foot clearance.
And what about backyard as well? Because you keep mentioning side yard, what about backyards?
That would apply to
It would-
that.
So side and backyard.
Yes.
And perhaps, and I don't know this, but it could be that fire says they can be up against the fence as long as you've got your 5 foot between your house and the shed. They might say it has to be a foot away. They might say it's 3 feet away. I don't know if they would even care. It seems to me they're gonna say it's 5 on one side or 5 on the other, from some safety standard that we think. We're still gonna have to deal with, can it be on a 0 lot line? And if it does, then how low does that shed have to be, obviously? And certainly the 2 metrics, the 12, and the next one at 8 or 8.6 or whatever it is. And maybe it could be 6 inches. I don't know, enough so the water doesn't go on. I honestly don't know. I mean, guess we get paid the big bucks to have to figure that one out. What do they say about, neighbors and good fences and good neighbors, and it's tough, I know.
Advertising for a company.
Okay.
So I think that's what we would like you to do, is go back and take another look at it. Look at it on the property line against the house. In your discussions, as you've pointed out, is consider a lower height, maybe 9 feet instead of 12 feet.
And sometimes the fence necessarily isn't on the property line or the setback. Is that correct? So what about if it's, the fence is not within the setback, but it's up against the fence?
I would say for the illustrations that we had here, up to 10,000 square feet, you're probably pretty close to the property line. You know, a corner lot may be a little bit different, depending on what, you know, again, the subdivision's
The green
requirements
belt,
were.
yeah, yeah.
But, you know, you may have some different situations when you get up into the hills with different size lots and hillsides and everything else. The fence might not be in the exact location. I don't think that's the issue for this situation. It's usually the smaller lots and, you know, where they're set.
And we've hewed it to the property line, not where the fence is, so.
Right, so it's set back from the property line.
Right, so, and I think, I mean, definitely interested in your direction, but, that kind of makes sense because we know where the property line is on properties, but people can put their fence inside their property wherever they feel like.
Exactly, because some people might have their shed or whatever up against the fence, but then it's within the 5-foot setback, so then what does it matter at that point? So,
Okay, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we need a motion on that?
No,
I don't think so, it's just direction, but I do have a question. On what section is this? 11-6A 4, item D. It says, no building or structure shall exceed a height of 35 feet. Does that mean that you could have an accessory unit that's 35 feet tall?
no, so that section is the general lot area requirements for single-family residential district, so that's actually talking about like all buildings. And and then if you go down to 11-12-2, that's where it talks about accessory structures. Which I guess accessory structures shall conform to the height requirements of the district. So yes, but it's hard to imagine that you could meet the total area like restrictions in a side yard or a rear yard setback and have a structure that makes sense that would be taller than 35 feet.
a lighthouse.
I stand corrected. But if that's something that you want to limit, I mean, that's another criteria that we could consider. We hadn't gotten that direction. The current code has it set up like that, where the accessory structures are queued to the height requirement of the general district. But if there's a maximum, accessory structure height that you all think is appropriate, we certainly would appreciate that recommendation.
And in the accessory dwelling unit state law, the building heights are 24 feet.
Really?
Mhm.
Well, then that's something to look at. I would think, follow that. That seems reasonable.
Yeah. And then I have just one other nit on, what is that, 11-16-1, item 8, under applicability.
Which section?
We
Sorry.
need to,
11-16-1.
Oh, thank you.
you talk about the planning community development director. So that should probably be changed similar to what we did everywhere else.
Manager.
Planning manager.
Yes, that will be addressed.
Like I say, it's a nit, but
Yeah, I think
for consistency's sake.
I was just focusing on the shed edits, but those will, I'm sure it's captured in the other, the ordinance for the other edits, for item A. So, but thank you.
So, we'll bring this back at the next meeting.
We'll bring it back most likely at the next meeting. Next meeting is actually pretty busy because there's some combination with the city council, and I can talk to you about that later.
Okay.
Is that a special meeting for that one?
there will be a special as well.
Okay. Two special.
So
Okay.
you don't need any further direction from us?
No.
Okay, then,
But thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
thank you for your comments, they were very helpful.
Thank you. So much. Have a good evening.
And before we go on to discussion items, I'd like to thank staff. I realize there was a lot of work in here. And for like 99% of what we asked for, you hit the nail on the head, so thank you. Okay, let's move on to the discussion items. We have staff report.
Okay, so we have item number 3A. This is an item regarding the farmer's market, which there is an existing permit that does not need renewal for the farmer's market, and I am under the permit authorized to make changes to the location of the farmer's market, but because there's been so many changes in how our downtown is utilized, we wanted to bring it here to you for your general comment and direction, so we can get your feedback regarding our thoughts on how to address some of these limitations. So the farmer's market used to operate on First Street between Mission and Copenhagen before COVID happened, and before the Copenhagen Drive was closed within the 2 blocks. So when the Copenhagen Drive was closed for the 2 blocks because of COVID-19, that created some traffic issues to where the farmer's market was moved to Copenhagen Drive. As of recently, there's been considerations about Copenhagen Drive status at the City Council, and one of the changes that occurred was reopening half of the block between 1st and 2nd Street. So given that we reopened half of the block in order to improve the accessibility in and out of parking lot 2, and also provide with some additional parking, which was underutilized within the closure, that space really shrunk. So the farmer's market essentially used to utilize both of the blocks within the closure because of how much space is available there with all the parklets and outside dining. So now they are very much squished in a block and a half, and they're also anticipating that their season is going to be coming in full force here as we move into the spring, so they will have more farmers that would want to be part of the farmer's market. So Roger, who is our new Public Works Director, if you haven't met him yet, is here, who has been working with the farmer's market managers to come up with some alternatives on how we could provide more space on Wednesdays for farmer's market. And we have an attachment 8 to this report, a diagram as to what our recommendations are today, and I'll have Roger walk you through that.
Thank you, Zena. Chair Williams, members of the Planning Commission. We work with the farmers market. They provided an exhibit on what they're looking to do and what we wanted to try to help them with in doing a kind of a hybrid, rather than going all back to First Street or squeezing them onto Copenhagen, is opening up basically a block in either direction on First Street, and then also keeping the already closed out portion of Copenhagen open to some farmer stalls as well. The farmers market has offered to install the traffic control at the alleys. That would be Parkway and Mallway, I think, M-O-L-L-E. Mallway. So traffic circulation can still reasonably work, and it would open up the intersection at First and Copenhagen for maybe another farm stall as well, and it also would allow some connectivity where people can walk from one block of Copenhagen to the next and not worry about a car coming through while they're carrying their produce or popcorn or whatever they get, whatever else they get. So that's what we're looking to do, and we would like to see what you guys think. We do have a representative of the farmers market here, Victoria, and I can't remember your last name.
Sarkia.
Victoria Sarkia, and she would be able to answer any questions as far as the upcoming magnitude of and how many farmers are wanting to utilize the Solvang Farmers Market, and how squeezed they really are. 'Cause she's out there every Wednesday trying to set up and trying to work on all the logistics. So she's really working hard to try to make this happen as well. So again, she's available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Hi, guys. Yeah, so we lost like 100 feet. I had to move like 11 farmers in a week's notice. Yeah, we're going into the spring, so I'm looking to add at least 550 more feet and 9 farmers just at our current attendance from last year. We did lose a couple of farmers from the First Street to the Copenhagen move, and because of COVID. So we did shrink a little bit in terms of yearly attendance. This new site that we're suggesting would give me room to add potentially 5 or 6 new farmers, which would be really great for the farmers market. All the rest of our markets for Santa Barbara County are doing really well except for Solvang. The move itself has kind of taken us out of a pretty good visual space. Using part of First would put us back at least a little bit closer to, ongoing traffic on the highway. So it would bring back more locals. I could bring more local farmers, which would be great. There's a lot of really great local farmers in this area. Yeah, I just worked on that site map. Let me know if you have any questions.
I'm curious, if Copenhagen was open, you guys would prefer to go back to your First Street that you've been doing for the last whatever years, right? Because then you
Yeah.
came all the way to Mission and you came down to, I think, Molly Way, didn't you? Come all the way down to the alley. And that's a preferred.
That's definitely preferred, but we do have some problems with, there's a hotel that opened up just past the alley on First Street, and they have access to their parking that goes down into like a little back area off of First, and so just going to the alley would allow them their access to their parking, and we just want to make sure we do everything we can for the businesses that are our neighbors, and so with that, we would still need part of Copenhagen to utilize, and we'd be able to allow more openings in front of businesses, which we don't really have right now because we're at max capacity. And so it's just as we get busier and busier, it's really important to be able to do that to us.
Now the question, have you ever thought of going into just parking lot number 2 completely?
Yeah, we did talk about that, and I think we would fit, but we would be taking up so much parking. And opening up access to the parking, which is what happened in the last couple of weeks, did actually help the market, and I think it was good for the businesses too. I mean, it's having that access only on one side did limit the use of that parking lot. So seeing it open again, easily accessible, did bump up business for us anyway. So taking it over doesn't really seem like the best move.
And then the question of staff, because it was discussed before that Copenhagen was going to be open February 1, but because of COVID and the latest, we're kicking it to March 1 or maybe even April 1. I don't know when they're going to. If that was to open, when that opens, I would venture to add up the parking that Copenhagen First Street, and we might lose less in parking lot 2 if they wanted parking lot 2. If 2 worked for them, assuming Copenhagen's open, obviously. If Copenhagen's closed, you take away parking lot 2, that's a little tougher. I mean, it's almost like the closing of Copenhagen, this COVID has put people in a flux as it has in Santa Barbara. I'm down there all the time, and they've moved their farmers markets all over for the exact same reasons. But we may be coming to a quicker close on opening Copenhagen, at least temporarily, until we decide to close it permanently, perhaps. So I'm trying to, whatever they think they'd work. I'd hate to see Copenhagen closed like it is now, and we close off First Street. It's tough already getting through town on Wednesdays. It's okay right now, but if we're doing this in August and July, that could be really difficult. So I wouldn't mind it now, and maybe when Copenhagen opens, we look at it again, as long as it doesn't mess you guys up with moving, and then, oh, let's look at parking lot 2, really try to bang them out at parking lot 2 and get our parking back on these streets. I'll bet it's a net loss on parking. They'd be close to Mission Drive with the park right there, spilling into the park even a little, if that's allowed, as a gateway. You underutilize that park at times for things like this, to really draw people in, and really have a nice, walking area. So I like the park. I like that, you've lost the one down there where the police station's going in, right? Some of our,
2023, the breaking ground.
yeah, I enjoyed that. I like that better than the streets, to
It
be
is
honest
really
with
great.
you.
Saturday one in the parking lot?
Yeah.
That was the easy one.
Yeah, it's in the commuter lot, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't walked that parking lot for space for the farmer's market in quite some time. I don't think it was big enough for our attendance.
Parking lot 2.
Yeah,
Oh.
we're at 32 farmers, which is,
So maybe it wouldn't work then.
yeah, when I checked it last time when this happened before, we had talked about it, and I believe it was a little too small, but.
Oh, okay.
But I agree, it's not great to keep moving us.
Right.
And the intersection at Copenhagen and First during the market isn't really utilized for people trying to go through Solvang. It's a lot of businesses, trucks dropping things off and stuff and doing like U-turns, and so it's not a great scene anyway. So shutting it off I think would be better, but only during, while Copenhagen is closed.
And just to clarify for the commission, the city council at this point has not set any date for reopening of Copenhagen.
I have a question. What about utilizing private property, like the old bank building that's been vacant for a long time? That's a huge parking lot. And is that an option for them to use it? Because then you have, was it parking lot 1, I'm assuming, is the one by Burke Homes? And you have all that parking right there, they could just walk right there. And that would be, and then all the while leaving the roads open during that time. And they're on Mission Drive, so they get a lot of visibility right there too. So,
I don't know if a private lot is the long-term solution for them. I understand it's been leased, maybe not leased, maybe it is, maybe not. So it's again moving them and then moving again. I loved First Street when I was on First Street. I thought that was great. Parking lot 2 doesn't work. I'd love to see it go back to First Street. And maybe you do the Copenhagen and First Street for now, understanding that if Copenhagen Street opens up again, it doesn't affect you guys because it's still closed off for you. It just affects.
Well, then we would be going all the way up to the freeway.
Correct.
And blocking off that for south.
But you go alley to alley, which allows that to come through, and it
That would
doesn't
be
hurt that
great.
hotel.
Yeah.
So that T might work, because if Copenhagen gets open, we can always close it for you anyway, right?
Yeah, we have the signage to do it, and
Yeah.
we're really capable. That's actually the idea for the next location for Santa Barbara, once we move out of the Coda lot, is taking over an intersection space downtown. So, Peru, I think is what we're looking at.
We have nobody here. Is there anybody online that would like to comment? Is there anybody online? It's not. So, bring it back. I don't have any real problem with what they're showing here. My only concern is, what is the city council gonna do about Copenhagen? And, allowing them to set up here and then, next May, June, they decide, well, we're gonna open it up, and they're gonna have to move again.
Why would they have to move? On Wednesday afternoons, we just close it down?
yeah, like you close First Street.
Yeah. Because it's just Wednesdays, I know people get a little irritated with, you can't park at this time, and that's more of those merchants along there that you'd have to have that discussion with. I'm not a merchant on there, but I know that can be an irritation at 1 o'clock where nobody can park on all that stuff. That makes it tough.
We did have a stipulation in our permitting that we would go back to our original location after Copenhagen opened. So,
Back to First Street.
Yeah, with our original
But
space.
you'd have fewer spaces though, right?
It would be a little smaller, yeah, but we did lose some people, so.
But it's a cool feeling. It's a nice feeling just on First Street.
It is,
There.
and we're not in
Something
front of as
special.
many businesses too, and so,
Right, and it spills onto the park.
yeah.
Right.
That hotel, I hadn't thought about that, that
Yeah.
could be a little issue. I could see that. Hmm. How did you guys handle it?
They actually opened just as
After
COVID
COVID.
was starting, so they
Yeah.
did start the plans for that with us already operating,
Gotcha. Yeah, no, they knew you were,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
but we're happy to try to figure something out.
Okay, so I think
There's no
we don't
motion
have
needed,
any
just,
objection to this.
Mine right here looks fine to me.
Yeah, if this works for now, and then we'll just, next step is if Copenhagen gets back open ever, and then go back to First Street, or come back to us again and go back to First Street, so that we don't lose all that parking all the time. Seems reasonable.
thank you for all your comments. Thank you.
Okay, status reports.
All right. So you have in your packet a summary that's prepared and maintained by the planning department under item 3B, which shows all of the ongoing projects, approved projects that are not constructed yet, future projects, and annuals. I think I would just go over some of the more prevalent, larger projects here that are
Let me
to be-
just ask one question before you go too far. The very first item, the fire damage building on Alisal,
Mhm.
it says it's 75% complete. But driving by there, it looks like people are living there. So is it really only 75% complete?
I would have to check back on the status of that, but yes, it's not,
I mean, I haven't
occupancy has not been issued.
once seen any workmen there or anything.
I can definitely check on that, but to my knowledge, occupancy has not been issued on that project.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
So I think I would like to just jump to the couple of more significant projects that are in the queue and just give you an update as to where they are and what to expect. One of those would be the 1783 Mission Drive, or the old lumberyard project. We have received an updated proposal. Just to remind you, that project came to you before as preliminary review. The last direction we had from City Council was to work with Ed St. George to develop a type of a hotel project. So based on the last comments that he received from the Planning Commission, he has done some rework in terms of the proposed site plan. We have that currently. We are working with them on reimbursement agreement and reviewing the project as submitted, and they will be prepared to present to you again for a preliminary review on the March 7th meeting. So that's coming up. We are also working, just so you know, that continues to be a work in progress, the Alisal Range annexation. We received an updated site map and their preferred layout that they would like to annex. So once again, we are working with them on finalizing the reimbursement agreement in order to process that application, and also doing some analysis with them in terms of the overall scope of the project, including connections for the water and wastewater, which will be pretty significant for that. So I wouldn't expect that that would be coming to you in the near future, but that is in the works. And then at the next scheduled meeting on March 7th, we have a few items that are sort of interacting with each other. So proposal is to have a few meetings as a sequence. We have a need to hold a public hearing for the city council, by the city council, for the redistricting process as part of going to elections by district. So we have March 7th marked as the date for the first review of the draft maps by the city council. So it's on the same date as your planning commission. We'll have a time certain advertised for that, and just as a note to you all, the draft maps have been posted online at districtsolving.org website as of today. So that will be one item, and then we are also proposing for the March 7th to have a joint session for the planning commission and the city council, which would be the report on the alternatives report. So that was the workshop number 3 that was held a couple of weeks ago. On the 14th, Monday, there will be a report going to City Council for their preliminary comment. Then the GPAC will be working on review of all the community input. And then March 7th, we would like to schedule a joint session for the Planning Commission and the City Council to approve the final alternative. And just to remind you that the alternatives that were presented in the alternative report that was presented to the community for comment, those are not proposed alternatives. Those were just 3 different versions to seek guidance and input from the community of what elements the community is supportive of. So the final alternative that's adopted by the Planning Commission and the City Council could be a combination of any of those features, and that's what we would like to have you hear on March 7th. And then finally, of course, we would have the regular Planning Commission meeting, at which point we'll be bringing to you the Ed St. George project for your preliminary review, and also the additional modifications and proposals on what we can work out between now and then on the sheds.
And you sent out a question of whether we could start earlier, I think.
Correct. So I would need
Joint meeting.
I would need to coordinate with the City Council all of your schedules, the sequence in which you would take those items. I would say that probably we'll start with City Council elections meeting, then joint commission or joint meeting, and then finish with your regular standing meeting.
So we just have one follow after the other.
Correct.
Time is whatever it is, right?
Correct.
Except the start date, start time.
I had a question, Zena. We got this flyer in the last meeting, and is this gonna be general plan update, these surveys, is this gonna help the general plan, or is this just stuff that's happening with staff more immediately?
This is a little bit of a different process. We need to complete that or have that survey completed and out with the public for a certain period of time in order for us to be able to qualify for certain grants. So that really has to deal with traffic safety specifically.
Getting roundabouts and all that kind of stuff.
Correct. Those came out in the utility bill.
It was in the water bill. There's 2 more in the back, the financial and water or something, utilities.
There's going to be a utilities community workshop on the 12th at the Vets Hall or remote participation, so.
Okay, do we have any comments from commissioners that we haven't already voiced? No? Staff comments, anything further?
No, thank you.
Oh, well, then I think we're adjourned. Thank you.